Hello and welcome back to In Response EDH. Thank you for all your support and thank you for coming back. We hope you liked this week's episode. Without further ado, let's get started. This week I'm playing my partner's Krav and Regna commander deck. I keep an opening hand with Kothafed the Soul Hoarder, Seraph of the Scales, Ajani Pridemaid, Aetherflux Reservoir, Soul Ring, Anguish Unmaking, and a Cave of Kolios. Up next we have Sam, playing his Tahngarth First Mate deck. In his hand he has Shiny Impetus, Rogue's Gloves, Kodama's Reach, Grow from the Ashes, Kessig Wolf Run, and 2 basic mountains. Going third we have Sean, playing his Lord of Tresserhorn deck. His hand consists of Talisman of Creativity, Hammer of Nazan, Mana Drain, Bojuka Bog, Bloodstained Mire, Basic Island, and a basic Swamp. Going last today, we have Chris, playing his Narset Enlightened Master deck. He keeps a hand with Fellowar Stone, Sword of Plowshares, Flying Crane Technique, Cabria Crossroads, Reliquary Tower, and 2 basic mountains. Let's get this episode started. I start this game off by drawing a card, then play Caves of Kolios onto the battlefield, and then tap it for a Soul Ring. With nothing else, I pass. Up next is Sam, who draws a card, plays a tapped Cinderglade, and passes the turn. Sean will be going third, who draws a card, plays a basic island, and then passes it over to Chris. Going last is Chris, who draws his card, and plays a Cabria Crossroads tapped. Then he ends his turn. On turn 2, I untap, draw, play an Evolving Wilds as my land. I then tap my mana for an Ajani's Pridemaid, losing 1 life. Then I end my turn. Sam is next. He untaps, draws, plays a basic forest for his land, then taps everything for Rogue's Gloves, ending his turn. Sean untaps, draws, plays a basic Swamp, and taps both lands for a Talisman of Creativity. With nothing else, he passes his turn. Even though Chris is going last, he doesn't let that stop him. He untaps, draws a card, then plays Reliquary Tower for his land, and then taps both lands for a Fellowar Stone. With nothing else, he passes his turn. Before he ends his turn, I sacrifice my Evolving Wilds to go searching for a basic Swamp onto the battlefield tapped. I untap, draw, then play a Vault of Archangels as my land this turn. I then tap 5 mana for one of my personal favorite cards, Archfiend of Depravity. I then go to combat and attack Chris with my Johnny Pridemaid for 2 damage, bringing him back down to 40. Then I pass the turn. Sam untaps, draws, then plays a mountain as his land this turn. Sam being in green means that he gets to play Kodama's Reach this turn to ramp out more lands. He gets a forest onto the battlefield tapped and a mountain into his hand. With nothing else, he then ships the turn over to Sean. Sean, on his turn, after he untaps and draws, plays a Bloodstained Mire onto the battlefield. He then, for 3 mana, plays Tybalt, Rakish Instigator, and immediately takes him down 2 loyalty to make a 1/1 red devil creature. He then cracks his bloodstained mire to search for a steam vents onto the battlefield tapped. With nothing else, he passes his turn. Chris untaps, draws, and then plays a basic mountain onto the battlefield as his land. Playing that Fellowar Stone turn 2 really helps him out here, by allowing him to play Captain's Call for 4 mana. Creating 3 1/1 white soldier tokens. Unfortunately, on his end turn, he has to sacrifice one of them because Archery and Depravity only allows him to have 2 creatures. On my turn, after I untap and draw, I contemplate what card I want to play. Ultimately, I decide that it's best to get one of my commanders out there, and I proceed to play Krav for the Unredeemed. I then go to combat, swinging my flyer at Sean's Tybalt and my Johnny Primate at Sam. I then end my turn and pass it over to Sam. He untaps, draws, then plays a basic mountain onto the battlefield. With nothing better to do, he decides to play his commander, Tahngarth, First Mate, and then follows that up with a Bloodforged Battle Axe, setting up for a swinging next turn. With nothing else, he passes. Up next is Sean, who untaps, draws his card, and then plays a Thespian Stage onto the battlefield. He then taps enough mana to play Loxodon Warhammer. Also setting up for his next turn, with nothing else, he passes it over. Chris is going next, who when he untaps and draws, he plays an old school fetch, Floodplains, that enters the battlefield tapped. He then ends his turn, passing it over to me. I untap, draw. With nothing really to play, I immediately go to combat. I decide to swing one creature at each of my opponents. They don't block and decide to take all the damage. With nothing else, I pass my turn, leaving mana up. Sam notices this, and on his turn he untaps, draws, plays a Kesed Wolf Run as his land per turn, and then decides to suit up his commander with all of the equipment on his battlefield. He goes to combat and attacks Chris with his commander. He then draws a card and creates another Bloodforged Battle Axe because he dealt damage. Because Tahngarth can attack when other players attack also, he decides to suit him up with another Bloodforged Battle Axe, doubling his triggers if he connects with another player. He then ends his turn. On his turn, Sean untaps, draws, and plays an untapped Dragon Skull Summit because he controls a mountain. He then passes through all his phases, ending his turn. Chris untaps, draws, plays a basic mountain as his land this turn, and then taps and sacrifices the Floodplains, going to search for a Prairie Strain onto the battlefield untapped because he controls 2 or more basic lands. It's like this round is only for commanders because Chris then taps everything to play his commander, Narset, Enlightened Master. Comment below who you think is going to win this game. At Chris's end step, I decide to activate my Krav, the unredeemed ability, to sacrifice my Johnny Pridemate to draw a card and gain 1 life. I'm digging for lands, and unfortunately that was a land, but not the one I want to play. On my turn, I untap, draw, and then play Painful Lessons to draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. Finding a land that I can play this turn, I play a basic Plains onto the battlefield. I go to combat, and I attack Sean with my commander. On my attack, Sam decides to send in his commander also. Unfortunately, he misses the triggers for his Tahngarth, dealing damage. Satisfied with what I did, I end my turn, leaving mana up. Sam on his turn untaps, draws, and plays a mountain onto the battlefield. He then taps 3 mana to play Whisper Silk Cloak, and then he attempts to equip it to his Tahngarth. Unfortunately, if it gets Shroud, I won't be able to target it. I cast Anguish of Making, exiling his commander. With his plans foiled, he ends up passing his turn. Sean untaps, draws, and plays a Scalding Tarn as his land this turn. He then equips his Devil with a Loxodon Warhammer. He goes to combat and attacks Sam for 4 damage, gaining himself 4 life. On his second main phase, he cracks his Scalding Tarn and searches for a Watery Grave onto the battlefield tapped. He then ends his turn. Chris untaps, draws, and plays a basic mountain onto the battlefield. Wanting to be like the cool kids, he goes to combat and he swings his Narset at me. On attack, his Narset triggers and he exiles the top 4 cards of his library, only being able to play 2 of them this turn. Not wanting to run into a cantrip, I decide to take the damage. On his second main phase, he decides to play Confusion in the Ranks, but Sean does not like that card, so he decides to mana drain it. Countering it, with Kothafet out, not seeing any point in creating more creature tokens, he decides to pass his turn. Turn 7 starts me off with untapping, drawing, and then playing Kothafet Soul Hoarder. I then go into combat, swinging my flyer at Chris and my commander at Sam. Before damage, Chris decides that it's enough with the Archchain of Depravity and he swords to Plowshares it. After seeing my boy be massacred like that, I decide to end my turn in sadness. Sam's up next when he untaps and draws. He decides, why not ramp more, and plays Grow from the Ashes, kicked, getting a forest and a mountain onto the battlefield untapped. He then, to try to cheer me up, gives my commander some cool goggles in Shiny Impetus. With nothing else, he passes his turn. Sean untaps, draws, and has 5 floating mana because of the mana drain. He uses one of them to play Mana Vault. And then the rest 4 floating for Hammer of Nazan. When it enters, it immediately equips to his devil creature. For his land, he plays Bajuka Bog, exiling my graveyard. It's my lucky day because when he goes to combat, he swings his souped up devil at me. After that, he ends his turn. Chris untaps, draws a card, and then taps 2 lands to play Sword of the Animist. He then equips his commander with a nice sword. He goes to combat, and my number gets picked again. I might have to buy a lottery ticket today. He searches for a basic island onto the battlefield tap with the sword trigger, and then after he finishes shuffling, exiles the top 4 cards of his library. Unfortunately for him, he ends up whiffing, which is great for me. I might have to buy that ticket. I decide to take the damage. With nothing else, he passes his turn. That last turn was a rough one for me. I untap, draw, and immediately I want some payback. I go to combat and swing one creature at Chris and my other creature at Sean. On my second main phase, I play Austere Command, choosing the mode Destroy All Artifacts and destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 4 or greater. I then play a Fetid Heath as my land this turn, followed by an Expedition map. I pick the best 7 and discard the rest, ending my turn. Sam untaps, draws. For his land, he plays a Winding Canyon. He nearly taps out everything to play a Sandworm Convergence. He goes to end his turn, and at his end step, he creates a 5/5 worm creature token. Sean's up next, who untaps, draws, looks at the board, and then decides to hold up all his mana, ending his turn. Chris untaps, draws, taps one land to play Skull Clamp. He then taps another land to attach his Skull Clamp onto his soldier, killing it, allowing him to draw 2 cards. He then taps 4 mana to play Phantom General. He then equips it with the Skull Clamp. With nothing else, he passes his turn. I untap, draw, play my Swamp as my land per turn. I then tap 4 mana to play a Smothering Tithe, and follow that up by tapping 2 more mana to play a Zulaport Cutthroat. I end my turn. Sam untaps, draws, decides he doesn't want to pay the 2, so I make a treasure token. He then replays his commander, Tahngarth, First Mate. He then activates his Winding Canyons, tapping his Tahngarth. He then goes to combat, swinging his 5/5 worm token at me. When he ends his turn, he makes another 5/5 worm token. Sean untaps, draws, plays a Rhythmic Study. With nothing else, he decides to pass his turn over. Chris untaps, draws, pays for the Smothering Tithe, as you should, and then taps 1 mana for a Soul Ring. He goes to combat, and he attacks me with his General. Then Tahngarth wants in, and he attacks me also. It's not looking good for your hero. On his second main phase, he taps everything for a Staff of Nin. He can't pay the 1, so Sean draws. And because Sean drew, he can't pay the 2, so I make a treasure token. I untap, draw, and see that I'm in the worst position, so I decide to play a Chroma's Vengeance to destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. I don't pay the 1 for Rhythmic Study, and Sean doesn't pay the 2, so I make a treasure. And then I sacrifice immediately, floating 1 mana. I then use it to play a Mentor the Meek. With nothing else, I pass my turn. Sam untaps, draws, and plays a Xenagos, God of Revels, on his first main phase. He then follows that up with a Questing Beast. He goes to combat, sending it my way. He then buffs it up with a Kessig Wolfrun, taking me out of the game. Sam then ends his turn. Sean untaps, draws, and then plays a free Mana Crypt. He then plays a Mystic Remora. Followed by a Sundial of the Infinite. And finally, he plays his commander, Lord of Tresserhorn. With his sacrifice ability on the stack, he activates the Sundials to end his turn. Chris then untaps and draws. He plays a basic mountain onto the battlefield, and then taps 4 mana for Urfara, God of the Polis. He then ends his turn. Sam untaps, draws, and then plays Bedlam, Creatures Can't Block. He then taps 3 mana to play Klothys, God of Destiny. He then goes to combat, triggering Xenagos, buffing up the Klothys. He sends Klothys at Sean and Xenagos at Chris. With nothing else, he passes his turn. On Sean's turn, he untaps, wins his Mana Crypt trigger, pays for the Risic Remora, and then draws a card. He then, for 3 mana, taps for Fabricate, searching his library for an artifact and putting it into his hand. He then puts Embercleave from his deck into his hand. Before he goes to combat, Sam activates his Winding Canyon, tapping his Questing Beast to fight
Lord of Tresserhorn.
But in response, Sean Chaos Warps it, making it an invalid target. He shuffles it into his deck. He then reveals Grenzo, Havoc Razor, putting it onto the battlefield. He then goes to combat and attacks Sean with his commander. He then passes his turn. Chris has an easy turn. He untaps, draws his card, looks at the board, and decides to pass his turn. Sam untaps, draws, and immediately goes to combat. But before he goes to combat, Chris taps 3 mana to play Polymorphous Jest, turning all of Sam's creatures into 1/1 frogs with no abilities. Sean still can't block his creatures and decides to full swing out at him. Before damage, Chris responds again, playing Trumpet Blast, buffing all his creatures +2/+0. Sam, in response to that, activates his Kessig Wolf Run, beefing up one of his creatures, putting Sean to 2 life. Sean untaps, and on his upkeep, lets the Mystic Remora die, and again, wins his Mana Crypt trigger. On his first main phase, he plays a Morphic Pool for his land. He then goes to combat and attacks Sam with his commander. Before blocks, he flashes in Embercleave, dealing lethal commander damage to Sam. He then plays a Talisman of Dominance and passes his turn. Chris untaps, draws, then taps 4 lands for Jazal Goldmane. With nothing else, he passes his turn.
Okay, I mean,
He calls it, but I'm saying.
do you want to what?
Who do you want to call it? Who do you want to call it?
It's always gonna be
It's
you.
always you.
It's always me?
Yeah, because you have the best
Evens.
luck with it.
Evens, I think.
Yeah. Ah!
I'm
Yes! I killed Sean! Good game.
Congratulations! Thank you for sticking around to the end of the video. Did you guess correctly on who was gonna win? Luck was not on Sean's side, but it was on Chris' side. Congratulations, Chris, for your first on-camera win. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Follow us on our social medias for more updates. And don't forget, we stream every Friday at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Have a great rest of the week, and we hope to see you next week.